The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber opened with a sound like thunder. Richards walked through them alone, his boots echoing on the polished floor that stretched for what seemed like miles. Above him, the dome showed the swirling colors of 1,000 star systems, each one representing a world under the Council's protection. The sight should have been beautiful, but Richards felt only dread. He had traveled across half the galaxy to reach this place. The journey had taken months, even with humanity's fastest ships. Now he stood before the most powerful beings in known space, carrying a message that none of them wanted to hear. The council members sat in their great chairs, arranged in a perfect circle around the speaking platform. Each alien species looked down at him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to mild annoyance. They had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years, bringing peace to billions of worlds. They did not expect to be challenged by a species that had barely learned to travel. Between stars. Richards reached the center of the platform and stopped. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Finally, Counselor Thane spoke. His voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but there was steel underneath the beauty. Human Delegate Richards, your species has requested this audience. Speak your message. Richards had practiced these words during the long journey. He had chosen each one carefully, knowing that the fate of his entire species might depend on how well he delivered them. He took a deep breath and began. Honored council members, I come before you not as a conqueror or a supplicant, but as a friend with a warning. Humanity offers its hand in friendship to all peaceful species. We bring knowledge, trade, and alliance. But we also bring a warning that you must hear. The Binari delegate shifted in her seat. Her insect-like form clicked and buzzed as she spoke through her translator. What warning could a species so young in the stars possibly offer to those who have maintained peace for millennia? Richards felt the weight of history on his shoulders. He thought of Earth, of the countless wars his species had fought, of the lessons learned in blood and fire. We have studied your history, learned of your great achievements in bringing peace to the galaxy, but peace is not the natural state of the universe. It must be protected, defended, earned again and again. The Kovani delegate laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You speak of war as if it were inevitable. We have evolved beyond such primitive needs. Have you? Richards asked. Or have you simply been lucky enough to avoid the kind of threats that would test your resolve? The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop. The alien delegates exchanged glances, and Richards could feel their displeasure like a physical thing pressing against his chest. Counselor Thane spoke again, his voice now carrying a note of warning. You seem to suggest that the galaxy faces some unknown threat. What evidence do you have of this danger? Richard spread his hands. I have no evidence of any specific threat. I speak only of the nature of existence itself. In every corner of the universe, life struggles against death, order battles chaos, and peace must be defended against those who would destroy it. The Eldari delegate, ancient even by the standards of his long-lived species, leaned forward. His voice was soft, almost whisper-quiet. Your species has a reputation for violence. Perhaps you see threats where none exist because violence is all you know. Perhaps, Richards admitted. But perhaps you see safety where none exists because peace is all you have known. The council chamber erupted in angry buzzing, clicking, and chiming as the delegates spoke among themselves. Richards stood in the center of it all, waiting for their judgment. Finally, Counselor Thane called for silence. When the chamber was quiet again, he spoke with the authority of 10,000 years of galactic rule. Human Delegate Richards, your species shows promise. Your technology is impressive for such a young civilization. Your adaptability is remarkable. But your violent nature concerns us greatly. You speak of war as if it were noble, of conflict as if it were necessary. Richards opened his mouth to reply, but Thane held up a crystalline hand for silence. We have decided. Humanity will be welcomed into the galactic community, but with restrictions. Your expansion will be limited to designated sectors. Your military technology will be regulated. Your ships will carry our observers to ensure compliance with galactic law. The other delegates murmured their agreement. Richards felt his heart sink as he realized that his warning had not only been ignored, but had actually made things worse for his species. "You are placing us in a cage," he said quietly. "We are placing you in a nursery," Thane replied. "Until you mature beyond your violent instincts, you will be guided by those with more wisdom." Richards looked around the chamber at the alien faces staring down at him. He saw no malice there, only the bland confidence of beings who had never faced a real threat. They truly believed they were helping humanity by limiting its growth. "I have one final warning," Richard said. "The universe is vast and full of wonders, but it is also full of dangers. Someday, something will come from the dark spaces between the stars. Something that does not care about your laws, your peace, or your good intentions. When that day comes, you will need warriors, not philosophers." The Binari delegate clicked her mandibles in what might have been laughter. "And you believe humans are these warriors?" "I believe humans are survivors," Richards replied. "We have fought and died and learned to fight again. We have faced extinction and refused to surrender. We have looked into the abyss and found the strength to look back." Counselor Thane's form flickered with what might have been annoyance. "Your species will learn that violence is not the answer to every problem. In time, you will see the wisdom of our ways." Richards nodded slowly. There was nothing more he could say. The council had made its decision, and no amount of argument would change their minds. As he walked back toward the great doors, Richards felt the weight of failure settling on his shoulders. He had come here to warn them, to offer humanity's friendship and protection. Instead, he had only succeeded in convincing them that humans were dangerous children who needed to be controlled. The doors closed behind him with that same sound like thunder. Richard stood alone in the corridor, thinking about the long journey back to Earth and the difficult news he would have to deliver. Humanity had offered its hand in friendship and been given chains instead. The galaxy's elder races had made their choice. Now humanity would have to make theirs. Somewhere in the dark spaces between the stars, something stirred. It was hungry, and it was coming. But the galaxy's protectors were too busy maintaining their perfect peace to notice the shadows growing longer. The mining asteroid spun slowly in the void, its surface scarred by decades of human industry. Brooks watched through the viewport of the UES Defiance as robotic harvesters carved deep trenches into the rock, extracting the rare metals that kept humanity's expanding colonies running. It was honest work, productive work, but it felt like a prison sentence. 40 years had passed since Richards delivered his warning to the Galactic Council. 40 years of growth under the watchful eyes of alien overseers. 40 years of having every decision questioned, every innovation scrutinized, every military development blocked by beings who claimed to know what was best for humanity. Brooks had been a young lieutenant then, eager to explore the galaxy and make contact with new civilizations. Now his hair was gray and his face was lined with the frustration of a man who had spent his entire career fighting bureaucracy instead of real enemies. The CUM system crackled to life, interrupting his thoughts. "Admiral Brooks, we have incoming vessels on long-range sensors." Brooks turned to his tactical officer, a sharp-eyed woman named Nash who had served under him for over a decade. "How many?" 12 ships, sir. "Heavy cruisers from the Aldari fleet? They're broadcasting Council authority codes?" Brooks sighed. Another inspection, another humiliation disguised as routine procedure. The Council had been sending more and more inspection teams lately, as if they sensed that something was changing in human space. They were right to be concerned. Humanity had been busy during these decades of supervised expansion. Human engineers had learned to work within the letter of the law while completely ignoring its spirit. Every piece of equipment they built served multiple purposes. Every system had hidden capabilities. Every limitation imposed by the Council had been quietly circumvented. "Put them on the main screen," Brooks ordered. The view screen flickered too. Life, showing 12 sleek vessels approaching in perfect formation. They were beautiful ships, all curves and flowing lines, designed by a species that saw war as an art form rather than a necessity. Unfortunately, they were also designed by a species that had forgotten how to actually fight. The lead ship opened. A channel. The face that appeared on the screen was familiar to Brooks, Commander Vorath, an Aldari officer who had been conducting inspections of human facilities for the past 5 years. His crystalline features showed the usual mixture of duty and disdain. Admiral Brooks, this is a routine compliance inspection. You will prepare your vessels for boarding and submit all records for review. Brooks smiled politely. Of course, Commander. We're always happy to cooperate with Council inspections. The sarcasm was lost on Vorath, who had never quite grasped the subtleties of human communication. Within minutes, the alien boarding parties were materializing on the decks of human ships. Throughout the asteroid field, Brooks met the inspection team in the main hangar bay. Vorath was flanked by 2 other aliens, a Binari technician whose compound eyes missed nothing, and a Corvani data analyst who could process information faster than any human computer. Admiral, Vorath said, his voice carrying the usual tone of polite condescension. We have received reports of unauthorized modifications to your vessels. Standard mining equipment should not require such extensive power systems. Brooks gestured to the massive drilling laser that dominated the hangar. That's a Class 7 mining beam, Commander. It needs a lot of power to cut through the harder asteroids. Everything is within Council specifications. The Binari technician skittered forward on her 6 legs, her multifaceted eyes scanning the equipment with mechanical precision. The power coupling appears to be standard, she buzzed. But the focusing array is unusually sophisticated. Better focus means more efficient mining, Brooks replied smoothly. We're just trying to make the most of our limited resources. What he didn't mention was that the focusing array could be reconfigured in under 30 seconds to turn the mining laser into a weapon capable of punching through the armor of a battle cruiser. The Binari's instruments showed only what they were designed to show. The inspection continued for hours. The aliens examined every system, every component, every piece of equipment on the human ships. They found nothing that technically violated Council regulations, but Brooks could see the growing suspicion in their eyes. Finally, Vorath called his team together in the ship's conference room. Brooks was required to attend, of course, along with his senior officers. The atmosphere was tense. Admiral, Vorath began, while we have found no direct violations of Council law, we are concerned about the general direction of human development. Your ships are becoming increasingly militarized. Brooks kept his expression neutral. I'm not sure what you mean, Commander. We're following all Council guidelines for civilian vessels. Perhaps, the Corvani analyst said, his voice like static, on a broken radio. But civilian vessels do not require armor plating rated for combat conditions. Civilian vessels do not need maneuvering thrusters powerful enough for evasive action. Civilian vessels do not carry sensor arrays capable of tracking objects at interstellar distances. The galaxy is a dangerous place, Brooks replied. We've learned to take precautions. Against what? Vorath asked sharply. The Council maintains peace throughout known space. What threats do you expect to face? Brooks looked around the table at the alien faces staring at him. They genuinely believed in their perfect peace, their ordered galaxy, their benevolent rule. They had no idea that their very complacency was the greatest threat humanity faced. Commander, Brooks said quietly, have you ever studied human history? Some of it, Vorath admitted. Your species has a violent past. Our species has a survival past, Brooks corrected. We've learned that peace is temporary, that threats can come from anywhere, that the universe doesn't care about your good intentions. The Binari technician clicked her mandibles in what might have been amusement. You speak as if war were inevitable. The Council has maintained peace for 10,000 years. 10,000 years is an eye blink in cosmic terms, Brooks replied. And even if it weren't, past performance doesn't guarantee future results. Vorath's crystalline form flickered with annoyance. Admiral, your species seems incapable of accepting that violence is not the answer to every problem. Perhaps stricter oversight is required. Brooks felt something cold settle in his stomach. What kind of oversight? Council observers aboard. Every human vessel, the Corvani analyst said. Real-time monitoring of all human communications. Mandatory approval for any technological development. That's not oversight, Brooks said. That's occupation. That is protection, Vorath replied. Protection for the galaxy from humanity's violent instincts, and protection for humanity from its own destructive tendencies. The inspection team left 3 hours later, their report already being transmitted to the Council. Brooks stood in the hangar bay, watching their ships disappear into the void, and felt the weight of inevitability settling on his shoulders. Nash joined him at the viewport. Orders, sir. Brooks was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to his tactical officer, with a smile that had nothing to do with humor. Send a coded message to all human colonies. Tell them it's time to accelerate Project Prometheus. Nash nodded and headed for the communication center. Brooks remained at the viewport, staring out at the stars. Somewhere in the darkness, humanity's children were building weapons and training soldiers and preparing for the day when the cage would finally break. The Council thought they were protecting the galaxy from humanity's violent nature. They had no idea they were about to discover what humanity was really capable of when the gloves finally came off. The galaxy's long peace was about to end. And when it did, the elder races would learn why humanity had tried to warn them all those years ago. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called at 0300 Galactic Standard Time. Roberts rubbed her tired eyes as she walked through the corridors of the Council station, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallways as the current human representative. She had been awakened by urgent messages from across the galaxy, each one more disturbing than the last. Something was wrong. Badly wrong. Roberts had inherited her position from her father, Admiral Brooks, who had died too. Years earlier during a suspicious accident while inspecting a remote mining station. The Council had called it an equipment failure, but Roberts knew better. Her father had been preparing for something, and someone had wanted him silenced. The Council chamber was chaos when she arrived. Delegates from a dozen species shouted at each other in their native languages while translators struggled to keep up. The great dome above them, usually showing the peaceful swirl of the galaxy, now displayed tactical readouts and emergency reports. Councillor Thane stood at the center of the chamber, his crystalline form flickering with stress patterns that Roberts had never seen before. His usual calm had been replaced by something approaching panic. Order! Thane called out, his voice cutting through the noise. We must have order. The chamber slowly quieted, but Roberts could feel the fear radiating from the assembled delegates. Whatever had happened, it had shaken them badly. The situation is grave, Thane began. 6 hours ago, we lost contact with the Eldari colony of Serenity Prime. The last transmission was a routine status report. All subsequent attempts at communication have failed. The Eldari delegate, an ancient being named Wisdom Keeper, spoke in his whisper-quiet voice. Technical difficulties are common in the Outer Rim. Perhaps their communication array has malfunctioned. That was our initial assumption, Thane replied. We dispatched a scout fleet to investigate. Roberts felt a chill run down her spine. The way Thane said, was our initial assumption, suggested that assumption had been wrong. The scout fleet arrived at the Serenity system 4 hours ago, Thane continued. They found empty space. No planet, no moon, no space stations. No debris. The entire system had been completely stripped of matter. The chamber erupted in shocked voices. Roberts felt her mouth go dry. A planet didn't just disappear. Something had to have taken it. This is impossible, buzzed the Binari delegate. Stars cannot be destroyed so completely. There would be traces, evidence, something. There was something, Thane said grimly. Sensor readings show traces of an unknown energy signature. Something vast and organic consumed the entire system. Robert stood up slowly. How many people were on Serenity Prime? 12 million, Wisdom Keeper replied, his voice barely audible. All gone. The reality of it hit Roberts like a physical blow. 12 million people, an entire civilization wiped out in a matter of hours. Whatever had done this was beyond anything the galaxy had ever faced. There's more, Thane continued. 2 more systems have gone dark in the past hour. Corvani. Station 7 and the Binary Hive world of New Prosperity. We've lost contact with over 30 million people. Roberts thought of her father's warnings, of the human delegation's attempts to prepare the galaxy for threats from beyond known space. The Council had dismissed those warnings as primitive paranoia. Now they were paying the price. Do we know what we're dealing with? Roberts asked. The chamber fell silent. Finally, a new voice spoke from the shadows at the edge of the chamber. It was gravelly and harsh, like metal grinding against stone. We know. Roberts turned to see a figure emerging from the darkness. It was humanoid, but clearly not human, with gray skin and eyes like black holes. This was a Void Walker, one of the mysterious beings who traveled the empty spaces between galaxies. You are not a council member, Thane said sharply. You have no right to speak here. I have the right of necessity, the Void Walker replied. My people have been watching the approach of the Devourers for 1,000 years. We tried to warn the previous galactic civilization. They ignored us, just as you have ignored the warnings of the humans. Roberts felt her heart racing. The Devourers? The Void Walker turned its hollow gaze on her. They are hunger-given form. They consume matter and energy, growing stronger with each world they devour. They have destroyed 17 galactic civilizations across the known universe. That's impossible, the Corvani delegate protested. Our records go back 50,000 years. There's no evidence of previous galactic civilizations. Because they were completely consumed, the Void Walker said simply. Just as yours will be, Roberts found her voice. How do we stop them? The Void Walker laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The same way every other civilization has tried. You gather your fleets, you make your plans, you fight with everything. You have, and then you die. There has to be a way, Roberts insisted. Some weakness, some strategy. Perhaps, the Void Walker said. But it requires something this galaxy has forgotten. It requires the will to fight not just for victory, but for survival. It requires the ability to embrace destruction in order to prevent extinction. Roberts understood. The Void Walker was talking about the very qualities that had made the Council fear humanity in the first place. Violence, aggression, the willingness to do whatever it took to survive. How long do we have? She asked. At their current rate of consumption, they will reach the core worlds in 18 months, the Void Walker replied. Your outer colonies will be gone within 6 months. The chamber erupted in panic. Delegates screamed at each other in their native languages, arguing about evacuation plans and defensive strategies. Roberts stood in the center of it all, thinking about the choice her species was about to face. Counselor Thane finally restored order. We must evacuate the outer colonies immediately. Pull back to the core worlds and establish a defensive perimeter. That won't work, Roberts said quietly. What did you say? Thane asked. Roberts stood up, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. Evacuation won't work. Defensive perimeters won't work. You're thinking like the peaceful civilization you've been for 10,000 years. The Devourers aren't coming to negotiate or to conquer. They're coming to eat. Then what do you suggest? The Binary delegate asked. Roberts took a deep breath. I suggest you do what you should have done 50 years ago. I suggest you listen to the humans. The chamber fell silent. Roberts could feel the weight of thousands of years of galactic history pressing down on her shoulders. The proud elder races, the peaceful council, the ordered galaxy, all of it was about to be tested in ways it had never imagined. My father warned you this day would come, Roberts continued. Not the Devourers specifically, but something like them, something that wouldn't care about your laws or your peace or your good intentions. You put us in a cage because you feared our violent nature. Now you're going to need that violence to survive. Thane's crystalline form flickered with something that might have been hope. What are you proposing? Roberts smiled grimly. I'm proposing that you free the humans to do what we do best. I'm proposing that you give us the authority to fight this war the way it needs to be fought. No restrictions, no observers, no rules of engagement. And in return, we save your galaxy. The vote was close, but fear won over pride. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Galactic Council voted to authorize unrestricted warfare. The age of peace was over. Roberts left the chamber, knowing that everything was about to change. Humanity was about to show the galaxy what they were truly capable of when the gloves came off. The war room aboard the UES Retribution hummed with controlled chaos. Kane stood at the center of it all, watching as his staff coordinated the largest military operation in human history. Holographic displays showed the positions of human fleets across the galaxy, each one hiding in plain sight as mining vessels, cargo haulers, and research ships. 50 years of preparation were about to pay off. Kane had been a child when the Council first imposed their restrictions on humanity. He had grown up watching his parents' generation chafe under alien oversight, building weapons in secret and training soldiers in the shadows. Now, at 57, he was about to unleash everything they had created. Admiral, his communications officer called out, "We're receiving the authorization codes from the Council." Kane nodded grimly. The codes were simple, a sequence of numbers that would transform humanity from a restricted species into the galaxy's primary military force. He had dreamed of this moment for decades, but now that it was here, he felt only the weight of responsibility. "Signal. All human vessels," Kane ordered. "Operation Prometheus is now active. All restrictions are lifted." Repeat, all restrictions are lifted. Across human space, the transformation began. The mining vessel Prosperity extended massive gun barrels from hidden compartments in its hull. The cargo hauler New Hope opened hangar bays that had been disguised as storage containers, revealing squadrons of fighter craft. The research station Deep Space Nine unfolded like a flower, its sensor arrays becoming targeting systems for weapons that could crack a moon. Kane watched the tactical displays as thousands of human vessels revealed their true nature, the galaxies. Elder races had spent decades limiting humanity's military development, never realizing that humans were experts at finding ways around limitations. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "all fleets are reporting ready status. We have 15 battle groups in position across the outer rim." Kane studied the holographic map of the galaxy. Red zones marked areas where the Devourers had already struck, consuming entire systems in their relentless advance. The alien fleets were massive, organic monstrosities that fed on matter and energy, growing stronger with each world they devoured. The Council's conventional forces had tried to stop them and failed miserably. Aldery energy weapons barely scratched their organic hulls. Binary swarm tactics were useless against creatures that could eat the swarm itself. Corvani technology was too precise, too elegant for this kind of brutal warfare, but humans had never been elegant. They had been brutal, efficient, and willing to do whatever it took to survive. "First contact will be at the Nexus system," Kane announced. "The Devourers have been consuming the local star for 6 hours. We're going to show them what happens when they bite off more than they can chew." The UES Retribution dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Nexus system, followed by 200 other human vessels. Kane watched through the main viewport as the Devourer fleet came into view and felt his blood run cold. The alien ships were enormous, each one the size of a small moon. Their hulls were organic, pulsing with veins of energy that fed from the dying star at the system's center. Tentacles thousands of kilometers long reached out from their hulls, drawing matter and energy into their massive forms. "My God," whispered his navigation officer, "they're eating the star." Kane had seen the reports, but seeing it with his own eyes was different. The Devourers weren't just weapons or ships. They were living creatures on a scale that defied comprehension. They were hunger given form, and they were turning their attention to the approaching human fleet. "All ships, this is Admiral Kane. Remember your training. These things are big, but they're not smart. They're used to prey that runs or hides. We're going to show them what happens when their prey fights back." The first wave of devourer creatures turned toward the human fleet, their massive forms moving with surprising grace. Energy discharges that could vaporize a battleship lanced out from their hulls, striking the leading human vessels. The aliens probably expected the humans to retreat or try to match their firepower. Instead, the human ships did something the devourers had never encountered before. They accelerated directly toward the enemy. All fighters, this is Commander Torres. You know the drill. Hit them fast, hit them hard, and get out before they can react. Torres led the first wave of human fighters in a suicidal charge toward the nearest devourer. The alien creature's defensive systems tried to track the small, fast-moving ships, but human fighters were designed for maneuvers that would kill any other species. The organic hull of the devourer was designed to absorb energy weapons, but the humans weren't using energy weapons. They were using kinetic kill vehicles, chunks of metal accelerated to significant fractions of light speed. The aliens feeding tentacles evolved to drain energy from their victims, suddenly found themselves facing objects that couldn't be drained. The first penetrator round punched through the devourer's hull like a bullet through tissue paper. The second and third followed, each one carrying a fusion warhead that detonated deep inside the creature's body. The devourer's death scream was audible across the vacuum of space, a psychic shriek that would have paralyzed most species. The human pilots just gritted their teeth and kept firing. Direct hit, Torres reported. The big one is going down. Kane watched as the massive creature convulsed and died, its organic hull rupturing in a dozen places. The other devourers paused in their advance, as if trying to process what had just happened. They're confused, Kane realized. They've never faced anything that could hurt them before. The human fleet pressed their advantage. Battle groups that had been disguised as mining operations revealed weapon systems that had been built in secret. Over decades, the Devourer's organic armor was designed to resist energy weapons, but it was vulnerable to physical impacts, chemical weapons, and biological warfare. Humans had always been good at biological warfare. Deploy the plague ships, Kane ordered. A dozen human vessels broke from the main formation, their hulls marked with biohazard symbols. They were loaded with every toxic, corrosive, and infectious substance that human scientists had been able to develop. The Devourer's organic hulls provided no protection against viruses, specifically designed to attack their cellular structure. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it was over, the Nexus system was littered with the corpses of devourer creatures, their massive forms slowly dissolving in the radiation of the dying star they had been consuming. Kane stood in the aftermath, watching the casualty reports scroll across his screens. Humanity had lost 60 ships and 8,000 people. It was a heavy price, but it was a price they had been willing to pay. More importantly, it was a price that had bought them something precious, proof that the Devourers could be killed. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving messages from across the galaxy. Other Devourer fleets are changing course, converging on our position." Kane smiled grimly. The Devourers had learned that humans were dangerous, but they had made a fatal mistake. They thought they could intimidate humanity by bringing more force to bear. They had no idea that bringing more targets just made the humans' job easier. "Signal all human fleets," Kane ordered. "Phase 2 of Operation Prometheus is now active. It's time to show these things what happens when they threaten humanity's home." The war was far from over, but for the first time in months, Kane felt hope. The galaxy's elder races had spent decades trying to civilize humanity, to make them peaceful and compliant. Now they were about to learn why that had been impossible. Humanity wasn't just another species. They were evolution's answer to the question of what it took to survive in a hostile universe. And they were about to give the Devourers a lesson in survival that they would never forget. The construction yards of New Terra stretched across 3 asteroid belts, their massive frameworks glowing with the light of 1,000 welding torches. President Morgan stood at the observation deck of the orbital platform, watching as human workers and alien engineers collaborated on the next generation of galactic defense ships. 3 years had passed since the first Devourer attack. 3 years of the most brutal warfare the galaxy had ever seen. The creatures had been relentless, consuming entire star systems as they advanced toward the core worlds. But they had made one critical mistake. They had given humanity a reason to fight without restraint. Morgan had been a senator when the war began, one of the few politicians who had supported the military's secret preparations. Now she was the elected leader of the Human Defense Coalition, the organization that had effectively taken over galactic security when the old council proved unable to handle the crisis. "The Aldery delegation is here to see you," her aide announced. Morgan nodded without turning away from the viewport. The Aldery had been the most resistant to human authority, their pride wounded by the collapse of the old order. But even they had eventually accepted reality when their crystalline homeworld came under direct attack. Counselor Thane entered the observation deck, his crystalline form dimmed with age and defeat. Behind him came representatives from the other surviving species, Benari, Corvani, Eldari, and a dozen others. They were the remnants of the old Galactic Council, but they no longer spoke with the authority of rulers. "President Morgan," Thane said, his voice carrying none of its former arrogance, "we have come to discuss the new treaty proposals." Morgan finally turned from the viewport. "The proposals are simple, Counselor. Accept human military authority in exchange for human protection. Keep your internal governments, your cultures, your traditions. But never again will you limit our ability to defend this galaxy." The Benari delegate clicked her mandibles nervously. "And if we refuse?" Morgan's smile was cold but not unkind. "Then you're free to defend yourselves against the next threat. But you've seen what happens when you try to fight without us." The reminder was unnecessary but effective. The Council's forces had been decimated in the early stages of the war. Their elegant ships and precise tactics had been useless against an enemy that fought with the single-minded hunger of a natural disaster. Only humanity's willingness to embrace brutal, ugly warfare had turned the tide. Human ships rammed Devourer. Creatures at ramming speed, their crews singing battle songs as they died. Human soldiers had walked into radiation zones that would have killed any other species, fighting hand-to-hand with creatures the size of buildings. Human scientists had developed biological weapons that violated every treaty ever signed, because the alternative was extinction. "The war is over," Morgan continued. "The last Devourer hive was destroyed 6 months ago. But the galaxy is not safe. Our deep space monitors are detecting movement in the void between galaxies. Other threats are stirring, drawn by the scent of a weakened civilization." Thane's form flickered with something that might have been fear. "What kind of threats?" Morgan gestured toward the construction yards beyond the viewport. "We don't know yet, but we're preparing for them. Every ship we build now is designed for war, not peace. Every colony we establish is fortified. Every citizen of the galaxy, human or alien, is being trained to fight." The Corvani delegate spoke for the first time, his static voice carrying disbelief. "You want to militarize the entire galaxy?" "I want to make sure the galaxy survives," Morgan replied. "Your old way of thinking, that peace was the natural state of the universe, nearly got everyone killed. The universe is hostile, dangerous, and full of things that want to eat us. We can't pretend otherwise anymore." Morgan walked to the center of the observation deck, where a holographic display showed the current state of galactic civilization. Most of the outer rim was gone, consumed by the Devourers. Thousands of worlds had been evacuated, their populations relocated to heavily defended core systems. "This is what's left," she said quietly. 3 billion humans, 8 billion aliens, scattered across 200 worlds. We're all that remains of a galaxy that once held trillions of people." The weight of that loss hung heavy in the air. The Devourers had been stopped, but the cost had been beyond imagination. Entire species had been wiped out. Civilizations that had existed for thousands of years were gone forever. "But we're alive," Morgan continued. "And we're going to stay. Alive, because we've learned the lesson that the universe has been trying to teach us for millennia. Peace is not a gift. It's something you earn by being strong enough to defend it." The Eldari delegate, ancient wisdom keeper, spoke in his whisper quiet. Voice. What of our cultures? Our traditions? Will humanity preserve what we have built? Morgan's expression softened slightly. Your cultures are treasures that deserve protection. Your art, your philosophy, your science, these things make civilization worth defending. But your old political systems, your naive belief in eternal peace, your refusal to prepare for threats, these things nearly destroyed you. She paused, looking at each of the alien delegates in turn. The new treaty gives you a choice: accept human military leadership and keep everything else you value, or try to go it alone and hope the next threat is as reasonable as we are. Thane was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of 10,000 years of galactic history. The Council accepts human authority in military matters, but we request representation in the new government. Granted, Morgan said immediately. The Human Defense Coalition isn't interested in ruling your people. We're interested in protecting them. Your species will have seats in the new Senate, voices in our decisions, input on our policies. But when it comes to defense, our word is final. The treaty was signed 3 hours later in the same chamber where Richards had delivered his warning 50 years earlier. The great dome above showed the construction yards of New Terra, where the new galactic fleet was taking shape under human direction. As the ceremony concluded, Morgan found herself standing alone with Thane. The old counselor looked tired, his crystalline form dim with exhaustion. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "Your delegate Richards tried to warn us." "We should have listened," Morgan nodded. "Richards knew this day would come. Maybe not the Devourers specifically, but something like them. He understood that the universe doesn't care about our hopes for peace. And now?" Morgan looked up at the dome, where new ships were taking shape in the void. Each one was a weapon of war, built by species that had once rejected violence entirely. The irony wasn't lost on her. Now we prepare for the next threat because there will be one. There always is. A soft chime indicated that the new deep space monitoring stations had detected something. Morgan's aide approached with a datapad, his face grim. "Madam President, the outer sensors are picking up movement in the void. Something big is coming from the direction of the Andromeda Galaxy." Morgan read the report quickly. Unknown contacts, massive energy signatures, trajectory that would bring them into the galaxy within 18 months. It was starting again. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "All ships to battle stations. Issue a general alert to all human colonies." She turned back to Thane, who had overheard the conversation. "You see, Counselor? This is why we can't afford to be peaceful. The universe keeps sending us reminders that only the strong survive." Thane's form flickered with something that might have been understanding. "What will you do?" Morgan smiled grimly. "What humans always do. We'll fight. We'll adapt. We'll survive. And we'll make sure that anyone who threatens this galaxy learns to regret it." As the alerts went out across human space, the great machine of war began to turn once again. Ships moved to defensive positions, weapon systems came online. Soldiers prepared for another battle against impossible odds, but this time was different. This time the galaxy was united under human leadership. This time there were no restrictions, no observers, no rules of engagement to limit their response. The elder races had spent decades trying to civilize humanity, to make them peaceful and compliant. They had failed completely, and that failure had saved them all. In the darkness between the stars, something vast and hostile was approaching. But it would find not the soft civilizations that had been consumed before, but something far more dangerous. A galaxy protected by beings who understood that peace was not the absence of conflict, but the presence of superior firepower. Humanity had warned the stars. Now, with no restraints left to bind them, they would ensure that warning was never forgotten again. The age of peace was over, but the age of survival had just begun.